films themselves, let's talk about cartoons. I love cartoons. In fact, they're pretty much all I watch. I basically default to them. There are plenty of cartoons that I can't stand, and yet I still have seen every episode of. But because I grew up with Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon, I never really watched Batman the Animated Series. Now, I've seen the show. I saw a few episodes as a kid, and I have a friend who owns the entire series, but I haven't watched every episode. And prior to this last week, I hadn't seen any of Batman Beyond, so I thought it would be a good idea to familiarize myself with the shows so I could have a little context.
And I did that by looking up various top 10 lists and forum topics in order to find out what people thought were some of the best episodes in both shows, and then made a list of all of the episodes that appeared multiple times. Still, despite that, know right now that I have not seen every episode of either series, and in the future I will not review movies based on cartoons that I am not familiar with. I wound up spending way more time watching the cartoons than I did the films themselves.
So that brings us back to cartoons. I like all kinds of cartoons. My favorite animated show right now, and by right now I mean on the air and still producing new episodes, is probably Adventure Time. And I like that show because it makes me laugh, which does seem to be the goal of most cartoons. But then there are other shows that go beyond entertainment into the realms of true epic storytelling, drama, and can actually produce some real strong emotions.
Growing up with Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon, I've run into one or two of those shows. On Cartoon Network, it'd be something like Samurai Jack. I freaking love that show. And on Nickelodeon, Avatar: The Last Airbender, which really is worth checking out despite the fact that the theatrical film is considered to be one of the worst movies of all time. To make a long story short, Batman the Animated Series is one of those shows, so it's understandable that the fans of the show were weary about the new futuristic Batman series, Batman Beyond, which went in a very different direction than most Batman adaptations go in.
So after getting a taste of both shows, what do I think? Doesn't matter. We're talking about the movies. Yeah, I know I just wasted a whole opening talking about cartoons. Don't care. I'm not going to talk about the shows. Movies.
Now, to be fair, Mask of the Phantasm is a theatrical film, whereas Return of the Joker is not. Normally, I wouldn't compare these films in an episode of Real vs. Real because I do like for the movies to be evenly matched in terms of budget and so on. But this was requested by a couple of people, so I will make an exception this time. What do these movies have in common? They're about Batman. They have Batman in them. Also the Joker. And both have complex mysteries that need to be solved, and they're based on two shows that were developed by WB and virtually have a lot of the same writers.
In terms of characters, I'm going to do this slightly differently, mainly because there are characters that show up in both films, and this is Batman. Most of you know who these characters are anyways. So rather than going through the films by themselves, I'm going to just do all of the characters together and give you my impressions based on that.
Starting with Batman himself. Batman in this case can include 3 characters instead of 2. First you've got Bruce Wayne in Mask of the Phantasm, then you've got Bruce Wayne in Return of the Joker. Wow. Time has not been your friend, Bruce. And then there's the new Batman, Terry. Mask of the Phantasm's Batman is pretty much the Batman most people have gotten used to. He's the definitive Batman. Most modern versions give the Dark Knight this personality. He's somewhat cold, has unshakable morality, and is an excellent sleuth. He's Batman. In Mask of the Phantasm, we actually see Batman's origins and the life he could have had if he'd chosen to give up his goal of becoming a masked vigilante. It's pretty well done. I feel really bad for the guy. The guilt he feels for being happy, the fact that he actually chooses to lead a normal life and then it backfires on him, the animated series really does have an excellent Batman. I noticed while I was watching some of the episodes that he's a bit of a goody-goody in the first season and gets a little more stoic as time goes on, and damn it, I said I wasn't going to talk about the show. Moving on. Older Batman is still pretty much in character, except he's probably a bit more of a bastard. He kind of comes across as a cold son of a bitch half of the time, which honestly is totally believable. I can absolutely imagine that this is what Batman would be like in later years. I mean, I doubt you can go up against Gotham psychos for so long without some of it rubbing off on you. Also, the dog Ace is fecking awesome. I want that dog. Terry, on the other hand, reminds me a lot of Robin in the animated series, and by that I mean the Dick Grayson Robin. He's more of a loudmouth, wisecracking kid.
That ain't coming out of my allowance.
While I was watching the 2-part episode of Robin's Reckoning, their personalities seemed pretty similar.
If I knew it was going to take this long, I would have brought my homework. You sure about this extortion ring?
Uh-huh.
It's been 4 hours.
Uh-huh.
You still think they'll show?
Uh-huh.
Lucky for me, you're such a good conversationalist.
And I've got to say, I do prefer the classic Batman.
I just did it again, didn't I?
Well, what I said still goes. There are enough wisecracking heroes out there. I prefer Batman to be a bit more of an anti-hero. The Joker, as always, is awesome in Mask of the Phantasm. He's hired by one of the members of the gang who's being knocked off by the masked killer. This turns out to be a stupid plan. Not entirely certain what happens to him at the end of the movie, but his presence is always an enjoyable one.
Oh, don't mind my home security system. Down, Rusty.
I admit, I always hate when I see any origin stories or inklings into the Joker's past. I mean, that works for most of Batman's villains because sympathetic villains really do make for really fascinating stories, but I would rather this guy just stay a complete and utter mystery. Now, this isn't really an origin story or anything even close to that, but I don't know, the Joker as a common thug is just disappointing. I'm not complaining too much, though. The Joker in Return of the Joker is also pretty much in character, although a bit weird in the futuristic clothes. He has a couple of good Joker-esque moments.
Bonk. Oh, right. Dead.
And I do enjoy how Terry gets into his head at the end of the movie.
Why? I thought the Joker always wanted to make Batman laugh.
You're not Batman!
I can't really say much else until I get to the plot. So, side characters. In Mask of the Phantasm, there's Andrea, Bruce Wayne's ex-fiancée. He might have had a normal life with her, but she moved away right after he proposed, because her father got into some trouble with a gang of criminals and they had to go on the run. She seems to be a pretty interesting character. Her relationship with Bruce is maybe a bit sudden at first, but I think it builds up alright. Actually, I didn't really care for her until closer to the end of the movie, but again, we will get to that later. Apart from that, there's this slime who I will just mention briefly. That was it. And then in Return of the Joker, there's Barbara Gordon, previously Batgirl, now the Commissioner, like her father, and Tim Drake, previously Robin, now an architect. Both get involved with the story when the Joker returns because it, of course, involves them. Barbara I like. Tim, I think there was a lot of potential for him to be a really fascinating character, given his past and the backstory that is revealed in a flashback, but honestly, I find him to be an exceptionally dull character. This may be in part because we don't see much of him, and in part because, again, what I'll talk about when I go into the plot. Which, why waste time? Let's go into the plot now.